The body of a Nazi warship is rusting away in the dark water off the coast of Uruguay. It scuttled to avoid being caught, got sucked up by mud, and was almost forgotten. Up until now, the Admiral Graf Spee was just another item that was lost during World War II. Early in 2025, a new group of divers went down to find out what was going on. They were shocked by what they found inside this once feared tiny battleship. A secret vault had been locked for more than 80 years. What was inside, that's where the story goes from being true to being much stranger than true. There is a ghost in the South Atlantic, a steel beast used to roam the dark seas of the South Atlantic. It happened quickly. It was deadly, and it was made to go against what people thought it would be. Nazi Germany's Marines had a ship called the Admiral Graf Spee, which was known as a pocket battleship. It wasn't the biggest warship ever made, but it was one of the most dangerous ships on the open sea in the early days of World War II. Admiral Graf Spee was launched in 1934 and put into service the next year. It was the result of both strategic ruse and engineering. The ship was built to get around the Treaty of Versailles' limits on tonnage, but it actually weighed just over 10,000 tons. In fact, she was more like 16,000. With 6 huge 11-inch guns, which were big for a ship her size, she had more weapons than a full battleship. With diesel engines that let her reach a top speed of almost 29 knots, she could beat anything that could catch her and kill anything that could outrun her. Admiral Graf Spee was sent to the South Atlantic against his will in 1939, just as war broke out in Europe. Act like a trade raider. Her job was to stop Allied ships from carrying fuel, supplies, and guns by attacking weak merchant ships. She was so effective in this campaign that it scared me. Over the course of a few months, she sank 9 commercial ships carrying more than 50,000 tons of goods without losing a single crew member. Hans Langdorf, her captain, made sure that all captured sailors were treated kindly and either put on supply ships or sent to neutral ports. He did this by strictly following the rules of the war. But every hunter is finally caught. The heavy cruiser HMS Exeter, the light ships HMS Ajax, and the heavy cruiser HMS Achilles were all able to find and fight the Grafs off the coast of Uruguay in December 1939. The first big naval battle of the war was the Battle of the River Plate, which came next. Even though they were outnumbered and outgunned, the British thought that by working together and not giving up, they could overwhelm the German ship. It did work, but it cost something. Admiral Graf Spee hurt all 3 British ships. It was damaged beyond repair, and Ajax and Achilles were badly hurt. She also took a number of direct hits. Even though the damage wasn't deadly, it was bad enough that she had to go into port to get fixed. Hans led his broken-down ship into Montevideo harbor. The neutral government of Uruguay could only let her stay for 72 hours because that's how international law works. British officials working hard behind the scenes used political pressure and false information to make Langdorf believe that a stronger British force was waiting for him just across the river. The truth is that there was no such force there. The bluff worked, though. Hans made a terrible choice because he thought the battle was hopeless and didn't want to risk the lives of his crew in a fight that was going to fail. On December 17, 1939, just outside of Montevideo, the Admiral Graf Spee sank. Yes, her team sank it on purpose. A lot of people on the shores watched as explosives tore through the ship's hull, starting fires and huge clouds of smoke. Her guns would never shoot again. Hans, being an officer that he was, took blame for what happened to his ship and the people on it. He wrote a letter defending his choice a few days after the scuttling, saying that he had done what he thought was best for his team and his country. Then, in a hotel room in Buenos Aires, he wrapped himself in a German military scarf and killed himself with a gun. At least at first, the Graf Spee wreck didn't blend into the background. For many years, pieces of the ship could be seen sticking out of the river plate. At low tide, her skeleton structure stuck out, rotting and broken, like a metal ghost watching over the bay. People from both abroad and the area would sometimes go to the spot by boat, going around the twisted remains of a ship that used to be able to change naval strategy, but was lost to the river over time. The hull started to get eaten away by mud and silt, which buried the Graf Spee slowly in the dark shallows. What was left was broken up by storms, and currents slowly dragged pieces deeper into the soil. Some people said the ship didn't want to sink, like it was holding on to something that wasn't ready to be found yet. By the 1990s, there were only a few metal pieces that could be seen above the water. Even those would disappear with the tide. The ship that used to make people scared across the ocean was now just a part of the riverbank. It was quiet and almost forgotten, but not quite. Some people saw the Admiral Graf as just another piece of war history. Others thought she was still a secret. What did you leave down there? What had not been found? What secrets might still be hidden in the ship's submerged rooms that haven't been opened in almost 100 years? In the years that followed, those questions would spark new interest, which would lead to new dives. They would discover something more valuable than anyone thought possible, things that will blow your mind. Years and years of mystery. The war moved on after the smoke cleared and the Admiral Graf Spee went under the water of the River Plate, but they didn't forget about the ship. Her wreck stayed a real presence and a symbol for many years. It was part of a war grave and part of a technology time capsule. Graf Spee caused attention, curiosity, and trouble even when she was completely broken. By the early 1940s, recovery wasn't just getting steel back. The British Navy was interested in the Graf's complex design, even though it had just been in the Battle of the River Plate. It was especially scary that she had radar and gun control systems. The German ship had a military edge that wasn't common at the time, especially since it was called a pocket battleship, which was not what it really was. British engineers and security officers worked in secret to look at the bodies. Even though the ship had been badly damaged and some of its systems had been destroyed by scuttling charges, some of them were still working. Reports from the time say that naval intelligence agents worked with Uruguayan officials to get back what they could, or at least take pictures and write down information about the ship's visible structure. Many wartime records are still sealed or incomplete, so it's not clear what useful information they were able to get out. However, it's a known fact that the Allies were eager to figure out how the Germans made anything. Over the years, the wreck stayed in the same place. There were storms that came and went. The tides changed. At low tide, the ship's shape would sometimes break through the water, as if it were made of jagged metal plates. People from other countries took boats to see it. People in the area told stories about hidden gold and secret rooms. He was mostly left alone, though, and mud and time slowly ate away at him. In the early 2000s, that changed. A large-scale rebuilding effort began in 2004 in Montevideo, Uruguay. A group of local divers led the effort, which was helped by private funds, to get artifacts from the wreck and keep them safe before the river took them all away. It wasn't easy to do the dive. The ship was in shallow but unstable water that was full of silt and strong currents that made it hard to see and made safety a constant worry. Still, the effects were truly amazing. Many people say that what salvaging divers found in this Nazi warship that sank in World War II will blow your mind. The ship's most famous feature was a huge 27-ton sight that used to be on top of its main gun control tower. This optical gadget was a marvel of engineering before computers. It let the Graf speed track and shoot at targets with alarming accuracy. It looked like a lost artifact from another world when it was taken out of the water. It was covered in rust and weeds, but for military and history buffs, it was a look into a risky period of Navy innovation. The Eagle then came. In late that same year, divers got out a 7,200-pound metal statue of an eagle holding a swastika, which was Germany's Nazi-era national symbol. The figure had been on the back of the ship for a long time, a strong symbol of the Reich's pride in its navy. Its discovery made news around the world, not just because of how big or heavy it was, but also because of what it meant. A few people called it an artifact. Some people said it was a sign of hate. The government of Uruguay was quickly in the middle of a big problem. What must be done with the bird of prey? Should it be thrown away, shown, or sold? There was even a controversial plan to melt it down and make a dove out of it, turning it from a sign of war into a sign of peace. That idea, which was pushed by artists and peace activists, got some support for a short time before it ran into strong opposition. People in the public, veterans groups, and historians were all worried about erasing past, even if the goal was only symbolic. The plan was put on hold in the end. The Eagle was kept in a safe place. It makes the news again and again when there are legal battles or rumors of auctions. There are people who think it should be shown in a museum along with information and background. But some people say it should never be seen again. Along with the Eagle, the salvage team found dozens of smaller things such as shell casings, mechanical parts, and personal belongings. These discoveries, while not as exciting, gave a more personal picture of life on the Graf Speed. They included tools for enlisted men, dishes for officers, and the rusted body of a typewriter with keys stuck in the middle of a sentence. Each part gave the story more depth. With each find, people became more interested in the ship's history. But divers and experts always felt like they were just beginning to scratch the surface. Some sections could still not be reached. Others were blocked off by the scuttling's force or buried by sediment that had built up over many years. The command center, the encrypted comms room, and the captain's quarters, which were the most interesting parts of the wreck, were still flooded and unharmed. People in the salvage world started to talk about it. People talk about what else could be down there. There are files, tech, and maybe even personal logs or coded notes that were sent to Berlin but never got there. Those rooms were still locked for now, but that wouldn't last forever. Early in 2025, marine archaeologists, engineers, and Navy historians from around the world came to Montevideo with one goal: to look at the Admiral Graf's wreck again. This time, the technology was much better than anything that had been used before. Salvage divers had been working for years inside the ship's rusting metal frame, pulling out objects and structural parts from the surface. But a lot about the ship was still unknown until now. A new dive starts. The project had been planned in secret for almost 2 years with help from groups in Germany, Uruguay, and the UK, as well as a private donation from an American historical organization. The project was built to be an archaeological dig for science. To the lead archaeologist, Dr. Elena Koig, the Graf was more than just a warship that had sunk. She told the press before the dive that it was a time capsule sealed by war and river silt. The tools on this trip were what made it different. The team brought in small automated submersibles with 3D photogrammetry rigs, sediment-penetrating radar, and ultra-high-frequency sonar instead of divers and handheld sonar. These tools, some things that were barely bigger than a carry on suitcase, could get through the twisted hull's small holes and send back detailed pictures of what was beyond. There was a clear picture of what was still hidden deep inside the wreck for the first time. The team was shocked by the first scans. A number of internal spaces that were thought to have fallen or filled in decades ago looked like they were still there, protected by layers of silt and steel. There was an interesting part right behind the ship's protected conning tower. The space was found to be part of the rear officer's block using deck plans and pre-war blueprints found in German Navy archives. It could have been the secondary communication room or a private archive area. It had never been reached before, not during the original wartime checks or during the salvage operations in the 2000s. It was chosen by Dr. Elena and her team to be the main point of the dive, but getting there wasn't easy at all. Over the years, the hull had moved. Under the ground, rusty beams and sharp steel made a maze that wasn't safe. The team had to send out Kronos, a custom-built submersible that was made to go through fallen infrastructure and send back thermal images and video in real time. Kronos would be in charge of the whole operation. It would be controlled from a control station on the surface of a lab barge that was anchored just east of the recreation spot. Kronos is said to have gone down into the river plate in the morning of March 11, 2025. The camera feed was filled with fog as it went through the forward hull hole. The team moved slowly to stay away from trash fields and metal that was rusting. When the submersible finally got to the suspected room, it stopped outside a bulkhead that had been corroded. A bent steel door that is only held together by 2 rusted bolts. Kronos used its artificial arm to open the hatch with steady accuracy. The pressure let go with a hiss, and then the door opened. The interior beyond was darker than imagined, but the sonar showed that it was true. A sealed room that is mostly whole, with only some sediment covering the floor. Because there was no air or movement, a thick gray film covered everything inside and kept it safe. The walls still had shelves on them, though some of them were broken. There was a desk on one side of the room. It had rust on its legs, but the surface was mostly still. Then there was the picture that lit up the screens in mission control, a big metal case that was locked and stuck behind a storage cabinet. It was half below the ground in dirt. It had a worn-out black eagle emblem that was hard to see through the dirt, as well as the faint shape of a serial number written in white paint. The group stopped moving. No one thought they would find something that looked like a sealed case, especially something that looked like it was hidden on purpose. Underwater, the metal box was impossible to open. There was too much of a chance of rusting. But just being there changed the goal. Elena and the rest of the team didn't jump to any conclusions. They marked its locations, put up a temporary conservation barrier to keep the compartment closed, and started getting vacuum sediment extractors and containment equipment ready for a second dive to get it. Speculation went off almost right away. The team didn't say anything to the public for weeks after the find, but insider stories started going around in military history forums and professional archaeologist networks. There were rumors that the box might hold secret wartime documents. Some thought it only held extra parts and pieces of tools. Others came up with bigger ideas, like encrypted phone records, personal journals, or even marine information that never made it to Berlin. But what really excited people about the find was that it was the first proof since 1939 that parts of the graph speed had stayed untouched, perfectly preserved, and could hold information that no one had ever seen before. Rather than being a sunk ship, the Admiral Graf Spee was now a live record. They were only just beginning, the store that is hidden. When the Admiral Graf Spee sealed compartment was finally opened and its contents brought to the surface, it shocked even the most experienced researchers working on the project. The sealed room in the back of the ship had survived because it was built with stronger materials. When naval engineers worked on marine capital ships in the 1930s, they often added extra support and watertight bulkheads to secondary communications rooms or record archives. According to what the recovery team said, this compartment was built to resist both battle damage and rapid flooding. This may have been because the ship was a lone raider working deep in enemy-controlled waters. The most important thing found inside the vault was a set of 3 weatherproof storage boxes. Their hinges joined together but stayed together. Carefully, each one was opened one at a time in a makeshift clean room in Montevideo. What they found was a mix of things that had never been seen together in a single military recovery. There are written records, coded messages, personal notebooks, and hardware for encrypted contact. The paper was surprisingly well kept. Each bundle was sealed with wax, wrapped in oiled cloth, and put inside 2 layers of metal cases. Many of the pages had the seal of the Secrets Lung, which was Germany's Navy War Command, and some had high-level clearance codes on them, which suggests they were never meant to be shared with the public. Others had notes on them in tight, slanted German script, which were probably made by staff officers on the ship. The first review team said that the papers had detailed records of encounters with Allied ships in the South Atlantic, as well as radio intercept reports and memos describing ways to avoid being caught. One report from November 1939 talked about backup plans for dodging British carrier groups. This suggests that the Graf Spee had access to more information than was thought before. In a different paper, it was explained how the ship would follow behind neutral, flagged cargo ships to hide its radar signature, a method that isn't usually associated with German surface raiders. The fact that there were 2 small crypto machines was also very important. These machines were made to work with naval communications, even though they looked a lot like the normal Enigma model used by the German military. They had special rotor settings and plugboard arrangements that were thought to be made for sending messages from the fleet to submarines. This could be a very important link in figuring out how surface ships worked with U-boat packs working in the Atlantic. For cryptographers, these machines were a big surprise. A lot of research has been done on Enigma machines, but customized field versions are not common. The historical worth was raised by the fact that the original configuration sheets were hidden under the machines in a waterproof pouch. Researchers were able to figure out which cipher cycles the Marines used in late 1939. When personal logs were found in a separate leather-bound folder, they added an unexpected human touch to the find. It is thought that one of the ship's top officers wrote these entries by hand. It could be the communications chief or even Captain Hans Langdorf himself, but this has not been confirmed. There were both technical notes and thoughts on morale, mission stress, and political doubts in the entries. One passage that stood out was written right before the Battle of the River Plate and asked if the commerce rating plan would work in the long term. It talked about how the crew felt more and more alone and hinted that there were problems with Berlin's top leaders over the ship's instructions. The logs also showed how belief, loyalty, and strategy interacted with each other out at sea. Officers had to figure out how to fight a war that was getting out of hand even in its early months by interpreting and sometimes questioning methods. These papers are very important for scholars. They give you not only practical information, but also information about culture and psychology. They support strategies that have been thought of for a long time and question some well-known beliefs. For instance, some Allied analysts have long thought that graph speed worked with little to no touch with Berlin. The recovered messages show that this is not the case. There was clear back and forth communication with naval leadership, including reports on the weather, the locations of merchant ships, and even changes in South American politics. In a more subtle way, the finding points to a bigger network of operations. Some decoded messages talk about ships that are in parallel positions and working along different patrol lines. These ships have not been positively named yet. This has made people wonder how much of the Marines' early war surface strategy is still unknown or not properly understood. These very moments, the papers and devices are being kept safe and translated. The public has only seen a small part of it so far, but military history experts are already talking about what it means. Plans are being made for international gatherings. Papers are being put together. A possible traveling display is being thought about. Still, the rehab team is being careful. An important project member wrote in a private report that we haven't just opened a vault in a ship. We opened a historical vault. We still don't know how deep it is, but one thing is for sure. The Admiral Graf Spee was still making history. In 1939, no, not in 2025. So, how long do you think it will be before we know the whole story? Share your thoughts below.